Hello, welcome to the WarriorCast podcast. My name is Cyrus Ramesh, and today's podcast is on the justice system. Today's guests are students from Voices of Struggle. Why don't you guys introduce yourself?
My name is Aida, and I'm a senior and co-president of Voices of Struggle.
Okay, my name's Alexandria. I'm also a senior, and I'm also the co-president of Voices of Struggle.
My name's Oliver Elias. I'm a senior, and I'm the secretary for Voices of Struggle.
Cool, okay. Let's get into our first question then. So, given that America is 5% of the world's population, but accounts for 25% of the world's prison population, how do you feel about America's prison system?
I think, I know that we have, one of the highest rates of incarceration, and, that we're known as the incarceration nation. And I think that a lot of the time, too, there's, I don't know how to say it, there's, a racial disparity, not only in the prison system, because there's obviously a really big racial disparity in the prison system, and there's also a double standard when it comes to media portrayal of those convicted, and I think that also plays into the idea that I don't know, that people of color are often convicted more, and I think that it's an uneven kind of thing.
I think this question, when, let's say we're from another country and they're looking at those stats, they might ask, is there more crime in the United States? And I don't think that's necessarily the answer. Yes, we have crime, but I feel like part of it is our justice system, and it's higher rates of incarceration instead of higher rates of crime. I mean, of course, you're comparing it to, Norway. I mean, there's going to be less crime, but you just have to look at the numbers.
Do you guys think that maybe, crime is rampant in other nations as well, but just isn't as heavily governed as in the United States?
I think that, my capstone is kind of covering this too, but, I think that part of it was saying, minor misdemeanors, and, a lot of the times, communities of color are more highly policed, and that also plays a factor into saying, a minor crime, say someone would commit that, it's more likely to be caught than if, with a concentration of, a lot of police officers policing compared to a neighborhood that has less minorities or, a higher income neighborhood, because there wouldn't be as much policing, so it's less likely that they would be caught, So, even though the same crimes may be occurring, there might just be a, unbalance of who's being convicted for them.
So, more policing just comes with more development then?
Yeah, I think that we need to learn how to, there could be potential benefits of, improving our system and even policing and knowing where, what crimes are being committed and how to fix that problem.
Okay. So, going back to prisons, do you think that America's prisons are effective in rehabilitating prisoners?
I think we have to look at crimes for that one, necessarily. Someone who committed murder, do you think we have the type of, resources to, help them? Do they have mental issues? We don't have a strong, mental institution in the prison system. Where's that connection? I feel like there's, a weak link in between those. And I feel like I said, it just depends on the crimes.
I know, you guys are familiar with, Norway's, rehabilitation program, right? How can the U.S., draw from that in any way to try to improve our justice system?
I think that we could, but I don't think that America necessarily wants to do that, because if you see that there's an industry that is making you as much money as our prison systems are, and that you can basically bring back, in essence, slavery without calling it by the name and without outright saying you're going to discriminate against a certain race, why would you end that? I don't think that the American government's goal is to rehabilitate prisoners as much as it is to make sure that once they get out, there's a way for them to get back in.
To add to that, how he said we use them, the fires in Northern California, prisoners were used to help put out that fire, and they were paid $1 an hour, I believe it was. Yeah. So it's just, and you're in prison, that's a lot of money to them, and that's so sad how much they're risking, and it's not voluntary. That's just, they're doing it, but it's just for the money. The idea that they're forced to do it almost because they have to, buy food or whatever they want in prison.
So you mentioned how the prison system gives America a lot of its money. Would there be another way, like if America were to change its economic situation, that we could be able to support the country without having to depend on the prison system?
I think that, like, if there was going to be a difference in the way that we distribute our money as a government, it would have to come with, like, our taxation process. And I know that, like, for example, and, like, Norway, for example, I know that they have higher taxes, like, in the 20s, but it's also distributed into healthcare and, like, education, and compared to here, we have, like, lower taxes, but we also have to pay, like, thousands upon thousands of dollars for our education. So if we were, and, like, healthcare and stuff, we have to buy insurance. And I think if we were going to start with reforming, like, the prison system and the distribution of our taxes, it would, like, have to start there if we wanted to put more money into the rehabilitation process of a prison system compared to just, like, kind of milking the system to get the most profits out of it. I think that we'd have to start with, like, our taxes and stuff.
Does it seem like a possible change, or are we, like, past that point by now?
I don't want to say that we are past that point, because I think that a key thing in anything is to always have that sense of hope with you. However, I do think that trying to change the way that the prison system works here in America, it would go beyond just the prison system. It would have to be a complete shift in everything regarding the nation, not only how we spend money, not only how we deal with prisons, but and media portrayal. Everything would have to do a complete 180, in my opinion, especially because I feel like if there were something to be put in that would call for reforms in the prison system, that in the period between those reforms going into place and them being announced, we would see conditions for prisoners and things like that get exploited even more and worsen a lot before we could even see them get better. Because whenever you do something, you have to expect that equal and opposite reaction, and I don't know if that reaction could be quantified in America's case.
Next question then. Are you guys familiar with who Kalief Browder is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to give, like, a general summary of his situation?
Kalief Browder was a 16-year-old, and he was accused of stealing a backpack. And so they took him into an interrogation, and in that interrogation they determined that he might be a suspect. So they put him into jail at that time because they were awaiting a trial, and pretty much his family couldn't pay the bond, and when they had made enough money to pay the bond, they took the bond away because Kalief was on probation. So technically he violated his probation even though he wasn't convicted of anything yet. So because of that, he spent up to 3 years in prison. 2 of those, or not prison, it was jail. 3 years in jail, and 2 of those were in solitary confinement. And at the end, he was just released because the witness had disappeared.
Yeah, and he was never convicted, like, of his crime. So basically, like, all the time that he was spent for the crime that he was convicted of didn't really go through, or nothing really happened with that. And what she was saying about the solitary confinement thing, too, is the United Nations has, like, a legal amount, or something that's considered humane, and I think it's, like, 15 days or something like that. I'm not completely sure, like, don't quote me on that, but it's a lot less than the amount of time that he spent in there, which was really crazy. Yeah.
Does Browder's situation seem to be common in America, or was it just a rare occurrence?
I think that what happened to Browder pre-release and him getting questioned because he was, he fit the bill that the witness was providing. I think that's something we see every day. People getting wrongly arrested and convicted for crimes they didn't commit because they fit the picture painted by a witness that police are inclined to believe, especially when that witness is of color. Or, I mean, not the witness of color, but the suspect of color. I think that gives them more, that gives them more reason to go in for that arrest. However, what happened after Browder was released, there really is no silver lining to this story if you look at it from the perspective of Browder. I think that what happened to him after his release, that might be a little less common in the sense that, he ultimately tried to take his life 3 total times before he finally did it. I think, was it 2015 or it's 13 or 15?
16, I don't know.
Well, one of those years, he eventually commits suicide.
Yeah.
And I think that we do see people coming out of the prison system mentally disturbed, and, they end up with an immense amount of PTSD, and they're just sort of mentally ruined by the experience, especially when it's a wrongful conviction. But I think that we've never seen it to the point of Browder where it was, his life was completely destroyed at such a young, formative age that whether or not he got released within the 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, I think that moment of being marginalized and of being seen as a criminal, that just completely changed him, and that regardless of when he would have been released, there was no hope, which I hate to say.
So a lot of organizations who are similar to Black Lives Matter, a lot of organizations try to bring light to his story and try to set a narrative based off of the actions that happened to him. Are you guys aware of any organizations or groups that may have done this?
Well, we just watched the documentary on it by Times, right? And Netflix was streaming it, and I know that there was, I think, who produced that? Jay-Z? Yeah. And I know that there was a lot of other news sources doing it. I know TMZ did
Rosie
a couple
O'Donnell
of specials on it. Yeah, Rosie O'Donnell. And a bunch of news sources did specials on it. But then I think it's important to keep that narrative going, because since it happened, it didn't even happen that long ago, but I think it's still important to remember, because people often either forget as time passes because there's so much other things going on. But even though they covered it, I think it's important to keep that going.
I think there was his brother Akeem. He was advocating to shut down Rikers, and that's just one of the movements that was happening also.
Okay, so like you were saying earlier with movements like Black Lives Matter, it's the former president Bill Clinton. He had given a speech that had condemned the activist movement. It claimed that the group were defending thugs and other violent groups like this. Is this justified? Was his speech about this justified, or could you argue that it's more of an attack on an oppressed group?
I would say that it comes with a lack of understanding too. Some people speak out before they know the whole cause of it, and Black Lives Matter isn't asking for more, or that saying that they're better. In no means are they trying to suggest that. I think that the group itself is advocating for equality and change in all of America and the world. And I think that by condemning them as, well, he said that they were defending thugs, I don't think that that's a true statement or a representation of their cause at all, because I don't know how to explain it, but I don't think that that's their message or what they're trying to portray. And I think in order to stop people from getting the idea that that's what the organization is about, that they can there needs to be sources to educate people about their causes and about what needs to change in our society.
To add on to Aida, I think that the biggest problem with the perception of the Black Lives Matter movement is that when certain people hear Black Lives Matter, they might think that it insinuates the devaluing of another life or putting another life on the back burner, but that's not at all what it is. The reason it is Black Lives Matter is because at the time that this movement was created and it was started, the racial and minority group of America that was being targeted the most by all social and government institutions was African American communities, and there's no denying that. So in them saying Black Lives Matter, they're not saying that white lives don't matter. They're not saying that Latino lives don't matter. They're not saying that blue lives don't matter. What they're saying is that everyone acknowledges all these other lives as mattering, so why can't ours be at the same standard? It's not a matter of we're going to put ourselves above the white man. We're not trying to put ourselves, up higher on the ladder of oppression. That's not at all what it is. It's we need to mobilize, we need to group up, and we need to make our voices heard. And if the only way that we're going to get heard is by having such a, polarizing hashtag or name behind it, the message is always going to be towards equality. It's never going to be for the betterment of one group at the expense of another.
Okay. Continuing with Bill Clinton and the justice system, he was also the president that had imposed the 3 strikes rule, which it dictates that once someone is convicted of a third felony, that they must be sentenced to death. Is this justified? Is this I'm trying to think of the word. Is this morally correct, or should this be happening within our country?
It was life, I think.
Oh, to life.
Yeah, to life. Oops.
Since life. Okay. Well, I still don't think it's justified because going back to Kalief Browder, his initial charge when he was put on probation, he was joyriding in a bakery truck, and he was charged with. So he accepted a plea, but that plea said that he would be charged with a felon, and he would be on 5 years of probation. So that's already 1 felony for joyriding in a bakery truck.
And he was really young at the time too. And in his case, he didn't have a lot of money to afford a really good lawyer that could defend his case where he wouldn't have to take the plea bargain. He it seemed like a better option. And now that since he had that felony, it ultimately led into when he was accused of stealing a backpack, it violated his probation, even though he wasn't, even though he never did that, he was still convicted of that.
With his young age, arises the question: should his ruling, or should anybody's eventual verdict, or whatever they are sentenced to, should their age matter? And if so, at what age should the point be?
I think age definitely does matter. I know that I'm pretty sure your cognitive thinking and decision making part of your brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25, and I think that really plays into how teenagers and stuff make decisions on their life. They think since their brain isn't fully developed, a lot of the times it's rash decisions and it's more impulsive just because biologically they haven't matured to that level yet, which isn't a thing saying, oh, all teenagers are immature, they're going to make bad decisions. That's not at all what it is. It's just biologically they haven't developed into the same mindset as an adult. And I think if, when they do make, for example, when Kalief Browder stole the bakery truck, he wasn't thinking this is such a terrible thing to do. I guess he didn't consider the ultimate consequence that it was going to have on his life. And he was I think he was under 16, but there was a law in New York saying that it's one of the only states that says 16 if he was tried as an adult. So even though he wasn't legally 18 or an adult, he was only 16, which is almost 10 years from his full brain thinking and stuff to be developed. And I think if they don't consider age in that, then they're not really considering how the thought process of the person that was being convicted, because they aren't fully aware of the decisions that they're making.
Should age restrictions on law or anything that has to do with age be specific to the region, or should it be the same across the entire nation? Because I know with the shooter from the Parkland shootings, he was 19 and he was tried as a minor, when there was one person who was, I believe, 16 years old, who had a toy gun, not even a real gun, and was convicted as an adult.
I think that the question about age is always a difficult one to handle when talking about the justice system. And it's a really touchy subject that sort of exists in a gray area where you can't take one solid stance on it should be a certain age or it shouldn't. And I think that the example of the Parkland shooter is great in seeing that sort of discrepancy between white crime and crimes committed by minorities, in which we have someone who did a mass shooting, killed people, yet they're going to be tried as a minor because of the color of their skin, whereas someone with a toy gun, because they're of a darker complexion, they're going to get tried as an adult right away. So I think that age is used as an easy excuse a lot of the time in court cases to justify the imprisonment of people of color.
So with all of this in mind, what are some ways that America can fix its justice system?
I think, like Oliver was saying, there are a lot of gray areas, like age. Like, it's really hard to determine a nationwide rule for this is the age that this consequence is set for. Like, it's really hard to determine, like, set laws for that. But I think to start bettering the criminal justice system in America, I think that we need to open the narrative to the flaws that it has. Because ignoring the problem isn't going to fix it. I think that we need to be aware of it and start working on ways, like, solutions.
I think also we need to change, like, our mindset almost. And that starts with everybody. Like, how does death justify death? Like, situations like that. I mean, it's different for each case. Like, some people may think it does. But, like, in other cases, like, I don't know, like, how does that... Like, it's just, like, what we think. Like, we need to all be on the same page. And that's why, like, the criminal justice system is so, like... can't read it. Like, someone can be charged for something so small and someone can be charged for something so big and get something like that's totally unfair for their crime. I think it just starts with our mindset.
Yeah, I think that it's like Aida said about addressing the problems, because I think that America has a huge problem with the hypocrisy that exists within our government and society too. And a clear example of that would be this kind of circles back to the question about misdemeanors and the third strike rule, that right now, socially, we're seeing that push towards the legalization of marijuana as a recreational drug. Yet, so many of the in so many cases, the reasons for a person of color going to jail or getting a misdemeanor is on a drug charge, a petty drug charge. So so it's like sort of addressing that. How can we go on Twitter and see videos about, oh look, here's a quirky new place opening up in Colorado or California that's selling weed infused donuts. Yeah, let's do that. And so many like businesses opening that are getting sort of, I don't want to say glorified because they sell weed, because I don't think there is anything wrong with people who do smoke weed or do anything like that. But I think that if you're going to shine a light on all the new businesses that are benefiting off of the legalization of marijuana, we also have to shed the light on all the people that in these states where marijuana is being legalized, look at how many of those people are in there for a charge because they were found with marijuana. So why can't we look at that and say, you know what, these people, their record needs to be obviously not completely expunged, but it does have to be addressed if they were taken in for a petty drug charge now that we're legalizing it.
So just wanted to give a thank you to our guests. Do you guys want to talk about anything you guys want to say?
Join Voices of Struggle. We meet every Monday in Miss Johnson's room up in B-Wing. It's a super great club, and I know the name of it might be a little off-putting, but it's more than just preaching about social justice. It's about forming a community with the people within the club, within our community of South San Francisco, and looking at everything that applies to us as brown people, as minorities, as people living in poor areas, people with mental illnesses, people who are queer, who are minorities, immigrants, everything that you can fit under that. This is going to sound weird, but that umbrella of oppression in America, come on down, because we're here for you.
Yeah, also everyone is welcome, and we do plan and attend events of social activism, so it's really cool and very informative, so definitely come down.
And mark January 19th on your calendars. Women's March is coming up.